What happened?
We can just like warm up, and also we do some shots kind of behind the scene.
Like between two ferns. This is my first iPhone. I've been Android for 10 plus years or 15 years. Like I just did counterculture about that. But
thank you for coming to Acrodot podcast, and so glad we have Glenn over here. He's an amazing design leader and have been working in the industry over decades. So I'm really excited to learn from you and hearing how is your experience grow as a design leader. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what's your journey looks like.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I've had a really strange journey that's not like most other designers. I was talking to a mentee last night and realized I had never had a designer as a manager, ever. I've either been leading the team or it was a startup and it was just me. I actually grew up outside New York City, and when I graduated college, I had no idea how to get a job. I literally walked the streets of Manhattan going into skyscrapers saying, are there jobs in this building? And nobody knew what I was talking about because it's not how skyscrapers work at all. And then I found some place that I can get a temp job and as like a secretary. But that's right about when Netscape 1.0 came out, and I thought it was so cool, and making web pages was so cool. And then there was these people saying, oh, I'll pay money to make web pages, which was crazy to me. I was like 22, 23 years old, and people offering thousands of dollars to do like an hour's worth of work. So I was just making things, and that turned into a company that had 30 people. We had no idea how to run a business. We had no idea about funding. We had no idea about pricing or marketing or anything. But we were making cool things, and it was very exciting. Somebody once described it as you might feel like a eagle soaring through the clouds, but in a tornado, even a turkey can fly. So we were doing something, and we built one of the world's first SaaS products, actually, this thing called Hot Cocoa, and it had everything in it: file management and mail blast and contact management. It had Salesforce things and extensibility. It was way ahead of its time, but we had no idea how to sell it or market it. And then after 9/11, which was only about a mile away from our office,
Wow.
All of the customers sort of disappeared. The bankruptcies were rampant. The dot-com implosion was one of the worst downturns in the market I've ever seen. And there was no jobs anywhere. I had to fire 30 people in 2 weeks. And the last person I fired was me. It was a tough couple of weeks, and I learned a lot from it. And then I was sort of liberated from that, like being a business owner, which is quite stressful. And we decided to move out of New York. We moved to Berkeley, California, and everyone here was into technology. I was so excited because in New York they were still using flip phones, and like it was more laggard thinking. But I didn't even know what to do. I didn't know what kind of job to get. I tried project management. I got fired because I'm a bad project manager. I tried IT, like running servers,
Right.
Exchange servers, and
Yeah.
I was so bored. And then I saw this job for interaction designer, and I was 32 at the time, and I kind of laughed like, that's not a real job. You know, like I would do that for free if you want, it's just fun time. And they were like, no, this is a real job. And in that company, they didn't have a product manager. So I sort of just came into it in the same way I had always come into these things. There was no designer or product manager. Design is just decisions.
Yeah.
Like you put the thing over here, put it over there.
Yeah.
What does it say? How does it work? And it's just decisions. And so they said, here, make these decisions. And that company was pretty bad from a mission perspective. It helped banks foreclose on poor people's homes. So I really didn't want to be there, but I was so excited to have this job. And I met a bunch of really great people. I tried 1 year into it just to see what a big company is like. I learned all about testing from Avinash Kaushik, who's a world-renowned analytics expert. He's at Google now running their analytics evangelism. And I learned all about p-values and statistical confidence and how to analyze tests and isolate your variables. But I also learned that I don't really want to be in that kind of an environment. And my boss there was not a manager, he was a business person. And then I met these guys at a new startup called Marketo. They had not hired anybody yet. They had just gotten their Series A. And I think they hired me because I could run the Exchange server, I could do the CSS, I could product manage, project manage, and design.
Yeah.
And they were like, this is great, we're going to save money. So it's just me and 10 engineers. And there was an interesting couple 6 months in the beginning where they built something that nobody wanted. And there was this little add-on that I kind of snuck in there. And everybody wanted that. So we sort of erased the part that nobody wanted and focused on that. And I gained just a little bit of credibility of, oh, he did something right. He did it in a novel way. It was a landing page editor that worked more like PowerPoint, where you can just drag things around instead of each box was its own thing with a template. And that really resonated with people who they understood how PowerPoint works. They could just drag things around and they were like, this is great. I can make pages that way. Yeah. And the company was Marketo. It was for marketers. And when I talked to them, I realized what they hated more than everything else was the developer they had to work with in the marketing department, because the guy was speaking Klingon and talking about cache invalidation. And all they wanted was to change like a grammar mistake. And I realized what they wanted was tools to be developers themselves. So what Marketo fundamentally is a programming language for marketers. Like you can make your own landing pages, you can make your own workflows, you can make your own SQL queries, you can, without knowing anything about programming. And that company rocketed in success because there was such a desperation to get rid of that Klingon-speaking guy that the marketers were like, I will pay money for this tool that I can do things myself. And that gave me a huge amount of credibility in what I was doing there. At the time, I was also reading a lot of books about design, especially like About Face by Alan Cooper. Mm-hmm. And every chapter, I was like incorporating every one of his ideas into the tool. And they didn't hire a product manager for 2 years, almost 3 years. Wow. And it was just me doing the designs and a bunch of engineers. They were building up sales, they were building up their own marketing, but it was just like this core group, and then it slowly started to grow. I was also doing the training and the support, and little by little as we grew, I kept giving my hats to other people. And the one hat that I never wanted to give away was the product design hat, because it's the most fun thing. It's like, I'm fine not training somebody, but no, I want to make the design. At the time, I designed in PowerPoint. That's how I made the designs, because there's kind of two kinds of ways of approaching the job. One is prototypes and the other is storyboards. Right. And I find storyboards actually are an incredibly easy way to explain to somebody what you want to have happen. Right. I learned all about it when I visited Pixar in Emeryville. They had storyboards of the movie Up, and they were saying, okay, then this is where the guy goes, this is what happens. And I was like, I could do that for a UI. And PowerPoint is like the world's best storyboard tool. The only thing it didn't have was components. If it had components, they honestly could be an amazing tool for designers to show what they want. Yeah. And that company grew and grew. It got bigger and bigger. It went public. I was in the building when you press the button and the confetti flies, and you're on TV.
Ringing bells.
Yeah, it was a very weird experience. I was doing really well, and I ended up leaving there after about 10 years. I was about 1,400 people at that point. Just an incredibly exciting time. And I think the company was design driven in the sense of they trusted me as the vision and architect of like how this thing works. How does it all work together as a whole? Right. And the product manager sort of understood that. I think it was really successful. They did a whole bunch of different startups. And as it got older, I started mentoring more and more. I started thinking about design of teams. Yeah. I spent time at a company called Treasure Data and completely changed the way I did recruiting, really focusing on junior people right out of school. Changed the way I did training, thinking about how you structure things, thinking about process, like designing the process, right. Change management, stuff like that. And then eventually I contacted with somebody who I'd worked with at Marketo named Raj, and he asked me to join him in CrowdStrike, which is a cybersecurity company. And this is by far the biggest team that I've ever managed, but I've really sort of leaned into, I'm not designing anymore in, I switched from a PowerPoint to Figma. Actually, I was telling a woman earlier, I was one of the first 100 users of Figma. He actually came to our office saying, here, try this out. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, this has components, it's better than PowerPoint. So I switched right away. And a friend of mine that I'd hired as an intern in my first company in New York, he ended up being co-founder of InVision, Ben Nadel. And I told him about Figma immediately, like, hey, you guys better look at this thing because it's going to be a huge problem for Sketch and InVision. So I've always been kind of like in the middle of what's been going on. I was on the jQuery evangelism team when it first came out. I've been involved in so many different communities for UX. It's just been a really exciting ride, and wherever I go, I try to evangelize what great design is, what great software is. I talk to a lot of universities and HCI programs about improving their programs so that designers can come out and know how to do the job, which I don't feel like they do right now. And I feel sometimes I'm losing the battle that most places are not design driven. They're not inspired by design. Because of that, a lot of things aren't as nice as they could be.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like when we are looking in a new phase of like software or services, right, like it is focusing on the experience. And I think design play a huge part in that and impacting how the product is and going to be like. Is it going to be delight? So I think what you mentioned really resonated with me, how you were focusing on the design-driven culture. How do you have the company trust you and credit you as a designer? Do you have any tips or thoughts how a designer can really impact and influence other teams in the company?
A long time ago, I was asked to do a day of consulting for NetSuite. It was a very big company. I met with the whole design team, and they showed me what they had. And I asked the group, do you guys like this? And no one liked it. They were like, no, this is not what we want. I was like, so why'd you do it? And they were like, well, the business person wanted it, the product manager wanted it, this is what they said to do. And I said, well, do you know what you would want to do yourself? And they were like, oh yeah. And now they got excited, and they were like, oh, we'll do this and this and this, and it would be so much better. So I said, so why don't you make that and show it to them? And I'm like, well, there's no time. So I said, okay, just show of hands. How many of you would come in on the weekend if what you had to do was what you wanted to do, not what the product manager said, and just make something great? And the hands all shut up. And then the manager says, I already come in on the weekends. And everyone's hand just like slowly drops. And they were just like, oh no. Is he going to ask me to come in on the weekends to do the garbage work? And I told him afterwards, I was like, you had such an opportunity, you just shut it down.
Yep.
And I told them, look, here's our superpower. We can imagine a better way of doing it. And we know how to draw a picture of it. That's huge. That is a huge superpower right there. Imagination and the ability to illustrate it and show it. And I said, once you do that, go to enterprise sales and say, hey, I want to put this in front of one of your prospects to see what they think about it. And all you need in any kind of a company is for enterprise sales to say, that thing, we need that thing. And you'd be so surprised how quickly product managers prioritize it. That at the end of the day, inspiration is part of it. There's this great movie, The Last King of Scotland. It's about Idi Amin. He's a dictator. And he has Nicholas as his assistant. And he says, I don't know what to do about these journalists. I think I'm going to kick them out of the country. And Nicholas says, no, don't do that. Everyone will think you're crazy, and they'll put sanctions. It'll be terrible. So he does it anyway. And what Nicholas said was going to happen, it happens. So he comes in, Idi Amin, and he's furious. And he's like, Nicholas, you were my advisor. You should have told me not to do this. Yep. And he was like, I did. I told you this was a terrible idea. Yeah. And he looks at him, and he has such a scary look on his face. Forrest Whitaker is such a great actor. And he goes, but you did not persuade me. You did not persuade me. And it was in that moment I realized being right is not enough. How many times has a designer out there said, but I'm right? It's not enough. You have to persuade. And that's storytelling, that's drawing the pictures of it, that's talking the language of business. Don Norman recently had a video where he's like, you have to talk the language of business about making money, about opening new markets, about retention rates. You have to put it in business terms. You can't just say it's better. And once you have success in that, then you're earning some credibility of like, well, let's see what the next thing is. And if you can repeat that, then you're a valuable member of that decision-making team. If all you're just doing is complaining all of the time and saying it could be better, that's never going to result in that seat at the table.
I think at the end of the day, a lot of the context for designer's role is actually how you can tell a good story and show people about your visions. Designer need to communicate why the solution is going to work, and I totally agree with you on the point about business. To show the ROI for design, like how that solution is going to work. A lot of the designer, in some cases, are too focused on the craft, but they didn't focus too much on how to make it work and how to actually solve the problem.
Especially in a big company, what often happens, I'll take Salesforce as an example, that they had this brilliant moment of it's extensible, it's changeable. And they had a few tabs, a few icons, and everything sort of fit. And then fast forward 10 years, and now there's 20 tabs and 20 icons, and nothing fits anymore. But everybody in every division was sort of focused on, well, my task completion of my task on this tab in this spot worked, and I tested it. But then if you're a user, you're in this tab forest where can I find things? And nobody's really paying attention to that. And so you might be doing something good locally, but it's not working as an overall experience. And I think in a lot of companies, designers are pushed to do what the competition does, or just do this task, shipping it's the most important thing. And they're not paying attention to, it's their responsibility of what the entirety of the experience is, not just shipping that one feature.
The other question I'm very curious is, you has been in the SaaS industry for decades now. How do you feel about SaaS? It's like different mindset.
I mean, the SaaS economics is partially what built the entire Silicon Valley ecosystem. Before that, we were just doing projects. You did the project, you coded it, it was done, you shipped it, and you walked away.
Yeah.
SaaS, you retained that ownership, and you sort of rented the space. It's the difference between, constructing a house and selling the house versus renting all of the houses, and you keep the real estate. I remember a guy told me years in advance that the company was gonna go bankrupt because the company did not make any money while I was asleep. When I was asleep, we didn't make any money because I wasn't doing any work. But his company made money after money because it's automatic. You don't have to put any more work into it. And I think that SaaS economics was brilliant for that, to say, I'll rent you the software, month over month over month. And I think that that's really important for the economics of the industry to work. But once you do that, there's a bunch of funny outcomes. For instance, I make the software and I deliver it. You're expecting me to keep making it better. But that means I have to invest time to make it better. But I can't charge you more per month. So if I'm charging you like $1,000 a month to use some software, and I keep making it better and better and better, you're just like, that's what I expect. I don't want to pay $1,200 a month. I have to figure out ways of making my pricing complicated enough so that I can say, oh, well, you're paying for the basic plan. The Premium Plus plan has these extra features. Recently, there's a Black Mirror episode all about subscriptions, and it was quite disturbing. But it really resonated with me as like how SaaS B2B works. That when you make things, there's always this thought, how can I monetize that? But as a designer, I always hate that. Like, I just want to make more and make the experience better. But that's what a great product manager will bring to the table, is how can we turn that into economic benefit for the company? And it's a real fine balance of charging for something that feels unfair to the user versus giving them something free that feels unfair to the company. And riding that balance of, if you're a good company, you do it right. If you're bad, it just feels like, oh, this is too expensive. I think something like Adobe right now, people are looking at, there's other ways of doing this. This is too much money. And what are they doing every year? Like changing the shortcuts. They're not really adding so much. And like Adobe, I would say, is on that dangerous side of the line. Some others might be on the better side, but it's very interesting how that economy works. And from a design perspective, it's created a wheel it's like a project has a start, a beginning, middle, and end. With SaaS, it's like this wheel where you're constantly making more features. Whenever you're finished, it's like, okay, on to the next thing. We don't really have good rituals to say, let's celebrate that we did a good job. I've been doing an initiative recently to say, let's sit down and talk about what success would look like for this feature. And let's actually check up on it after we ship it to say, how did it actually go? Because it's so rare that people go back and say, hey, the thing that we did last year, what happened? Do people care? I did that once many years ago. It was for A/B testing of emails that you would send out. And sales was adamant that this was an important feature. And so we built it. It turns out that 3% of the audience used it 97% of the time, and 97% of the audience used it 3% of the time. And most of that 97% was resentful that we built it in the first place. Because they said to me, I used to have to write an email, and it would go, and it would send. Now I have to write 2 emails because my boss is like, you gotta A/B test everything. So now I gotta write 2 different emails. I got a lot to do, but what are you doing to me? Every new feature, I find users are often like, okay, I gotta learn a new thing now. Even if it was a button that said make money and it just poured money out of the screen, the users are like, do I have to click it multiple times? What do I have to do? Is there documentation? And I mean, people, they get used to doing their jobs in a certain way, and learning new things is hard. We were just talking about Figma, and 2 years ago they rolled out that new UI, and everyone's like, where's the auto layout? And I can't find things. Everyone gets used to the system that they're in, and it's hard to keep updating your thinking to the new stuff.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a very good point. I was reading a report as well, talking about rebranding, how rebranding works for a company, and then doing that analysis, you actually see most of the company going through a rebranding or major redesign. It's actually going down, like overall usability, recognition, like all of that, the data goes down because like people are not familiar with your product anymore. And what you mentioned is about the SaaS is like always evolving and kind of like add on top what you used to build was kind of like a new model and really are kind of like similar to a design mindset. It's like how I keep refining and iterate on top of the current concept.
There was an interesting statistic that we had at Marketo, which was that the chief marketing officer had the shortest tenure of any chief officer.
Yeah.
And that there was a funny thing that happened. Every time you got a new CMO, they would want a new website and a new logo. That when you get a new CTO or COO or CFO, the new CFO doesn't say, okay, we're off QuickBooks, now we're into NetSuite accounting or Oracle accounting. They didn't change things like that. But every CMO comes in and wants to change the website, wants to change the logo. And it's flaw of thinking that will actually improve things. To me, it's a distraction from what could be real problems with a company. It's like, why do you want to do that? Is sales low? Or is brand loyalty low? It's just changing the logo is not going to fix that. I remember when Facebook was really getting raked over the coals and they were like, let's just change our name to Meta, right? That doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
There's still, systemic problems. And I feel like too many companies think that if their brand is tarnished, that changing the name is the solution, as opposed to fix the problem. I think like British Petroleum, BP, changed their name to Beyond Petroleum or something like that, thinking like, oh, that will distract people from the fact that we poured 10 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico.
That's a good point. changing the name is not going to change the product or services you actually provide. I'm also curious when you were mentioning design-driven culture, how do you recognize or build a design-driven culture in the company?
I think in terms of building, there's a few techniques that I've been incorporating most of my career that I find work. The number one thing you have to build is trust. If they don't think you're trustworthy with these decisions, they being management, engineering, product management, then they're not going to let you make those decisions. And building up those trust can come in many different forms. Before COVID, taking people to lunch, talking to them, listening to them, like that was a part of building that trust. It's a little harder now because over Zoom it's not the same connection. The second was understanding their language. If product managers talk about money and about TAM, which is like total addressable market, they talk about retention rates and economics, you have to understand that language. If engineers are talking about technical aspects of what is going on, you have to understand that. I love when an engineer says, "Were you an engineer?" And the answer is no. I mean, I know how to hack jQuery a little bit, but that's not being an engineer. But I know enough. I did a SQL tutorial. I usually have junior designers do a SQL tutorial. Just because, like, if you know what an inner left join is, they're going to trust you more. If you don't know how a database works, an engineer is going to look at you like, you're a child, here's your coloring book, you can pick any crayon you want out of the box, and just color. And it feels so bad as a designer to be like, you can pick any color you want. Like, it's so condescending and so debilitating. Whereas when you're talking engineering to them, you're talking about the different kinds of, let's say, pagination versus infinite scroll versus viewport scroll. And you're like, here are the pros and cons of those different things. You're collaborating, you're speaking their language. Yeah. There's another technique that I use, which was the 10% care pie chart. So imagine a pie chart, like this table right here. 10% of it, that's what I care about. I want that to be my decision. That means 90% of it is not my decision. I want fingerprints everywhere. You'd be surprised how good you can make a system by focusing on the most important 10%. I remember a designer once said, well, I want these icons. And I was like, that's dumb. The icons are not going to make or break the system. They're not going to be the thing that makes us successful. They're not going to build trust. In fact, just asking for that, you're telling the engineers you don't actually care about important things. Make that 10% about the information architecture. Make it about how the whole system works as a whole. Get people's fingerprints on all the other things. Then you're building up cognitive dissonance where, hey, the icons are my idea. Some salesperson will say that, so I like the whole thing. Meanwhile, doesn't matter, right? Let other people make those decisions. I constantly ask random people, hey, what color do you want this thing to be? Because I know it doesn't matter. The things that matter, though, you have to lay on the tracks. You have to say, this matters. I often use a metaphor of chips, like poker chips. When you work and you do a good job, you're earning chips. And those chips will dissolve over time. Yeah. So you have to use them. You can't not use your chips, but what you use your chips on has to be thoughtful. If you don't use them at all, you lose the benefit. If you use them on something dumb, you actually do more harm than good. But if you use them on something smart, it creates that trust that, oh, this person is using their hard-earned capital in an intelligent way. I'm going to trust them more to do that in the future. I often tell engineers we do not want throwaway work because they hate throwaway work. I try to get rid of deadlines and say progress is what we measure, not this date is the deadline, because then you'll do unnatural acts. They hate unnatural acts. So it's a lot of those techniques. I even invented like a different way of doing a change log just because engineers were saying, hey, your designs change after the beginning. And so we created this system, it's a spreadsheet. It wasn't like complicated. but it got everybody on the same page about every decision that was changing in a very low friction sort of way. That builds up trust. Every one of the things I'm talking about are techniques to build up trust. That's how you can be design-led. The other piece of it is you actually have to have a vision. You actually have to have, this is a good idea. If you have a bad idea and it blows up in your face, you're not going to build trust that way.
Yeah.
So being right is not enough, but it is definitely good to be right.
I agree. Design feels like you are driving the direction, like you are the driver. You have to really focus on what directions you are going towards. So I think as a designer, you have to spend your time really understand your user. I would say really understand the market as well, right? Figuring out what is the actual problem worth solving.
Subject matter expertise is huge, absolutely huge. I think also consistency is important. Like I have a Tesla that I purchased before I realized Elon Musk was crazy. And it has this full self-driving, which I didn't pay for, but they sort of give it to you once in a while,
right.
So, like as a teaser. So I try it, and it's so inconsistent. Sometimes it does a nice driving maneuver, and oh, that was what I would have done. But other times it panics, as if it's when I was teaching my kids to drive, and just go into the tree, and you have to grab the wheel and say, whoa, 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 that's not okay. And it's the inconsistency that makes me not trust the system. That's what the system needs. The designers of that system need to be thinking about trust all the time. How do I get people to trust that this works? And I think they're really overstating it of what it can do. It has inconsistent results. They're mismanaging expectations, make it sound like it's an automatic driver that'll always be great, and that is diminishing trust. Trust is such an important factor in the world. I mean, just look at our macroeconomic realities right now. And I'll try to stay away from it being political, but inconsistency hurts. It just hurts everybody who's trying to make plans, who's trying to say okay, if I invest this money here, I know what will happen. If the rules keep changing, if the expectations keep changing, that inconsistency diminishes trust. And like I said, design is decisions. It's not just software. We design how we're sitting here. We design what are the questions we ask. We design how the building works. We design how roads work. Some countries you drive on the left, and some countries you drive on the right, and that's a design. Our world is just, look around. Every single thing you see was designed by someone. Whether it was a person who was a good designer or a bad designer, I don't know, but everything was made a certain way, and we have to live with that world.
So how do you take designer, especially under the impact for AI, what is going to change, and what are some of the new skills you think designers should be picking up?
It's an interesting question because we're so early.
Yeah.
When the internet first started, I remember my stepmother said in 1997 or 1998, mark my words, the internet is a fad. And I knew it wasn't at the time, but you'd be surprised how many people thought it was a fad. And that was the beginning of the most disruptive cultural and economic technology that's ever been introduced. And now comes along AI, and we're in that same kind of early couple of years. Yeah. And some people look well, I tried it and it didn't do what I wanted to do. It had a hallucination, or it gave me a dumb answer. Yeah. But the internet in the beginning it had plenty of hallucinations and dumb answers. It was not reliable in any way. And AI is in that early stage, but I believe it probably will be equally disruptive, if not more disruptive than the internet has been. Even though the way it is right now, it is like a toddler, right? But that toddler is going to grow. So I think that designers, first and foremost, should just be aware of what is going on. What are the newer things? I think experimentation right now is probably the most important thing. And when you talk about AI, I try not to focus on just ChatGPT or a chat bot. Things like make an illustration, fill out a form, thinking about how agents can do things. In terms of UI, I've been thinking more about natural language filtering. So a big part of any SaaS product is filtering. Yeah. It's something I really did some pioneering work at Marketo to say it's metadata driven, it's more Englishy, but it wasn't like really English. It was very broken English. And now you could just kind of say what you're looking for, and it could translate that into a SQL query. And I think that there's more natural language UI that could be introduced, especially for complex editing or data analysis. The number one tool for data analysis right now is Excel. That's where people take data to go figure out what's going on. And I feel like if Excel really did have a clean natural language input, there's so many things people use Excel for, and that could be pretty big. But then there's like all these different sorts of agents and all these different sorts of things that are possible. Purely from a design perspective, like in CrowdStrike now, some people will use a note-taking things to summarize what was in a meeting. There's been experimentation with code and cleaning up your code. I actually think QA can use it really well to create demo data. Demo data is one of the most annoying things in a company to do. Yeah. The sales team needs to like show your work in a realistic environment. Yeah. It's really hard to create a realistic environment. And I actually think AI can be great at that, of just keeping a synthetic flow. So it's mostly about experimentation right now. I don't think that there's do my job as a designer in a really coherent way. It's closer to Tesla's driving, where it's not only inconsistent, it will just drive into a tree. I also don't think it's particularly innovative. Remember, differentiation is a key part of almost every B2B designer's job. They don't always think of it that way, but if you just do what the competition does, why would somebody buy your product over their product? You need to say, no, they're wrong, we're right because we do it like this and they do it like that. And differentiation is key. I don't find that any AI excels in differentiation. It's almost always, here's the lowest common denominator of it.
What excites me about AI is actually it changed the mindset, like how things works. Because if you think about like how software currently working, it is solving one specific problem or like one feature. It doesn't have the capability to do anything in a chain of thoughts or like logics. Especially like the new technology in AI agents can execute in a logical way. I think that's one of the new enhancement in the AI I was really excited about.
It's funny that you mentioned that. Marketo did that. This is starting in 2007. That was what we built. We built make a chain of things that you want to have happen. It was very object oriented, where it was like, hey, if this thing happens, do these things. And it was really easy to use. It just wasn't natural language. The closest natural language was I insisted that when you say wait 2 weeks, that the 2 weeks was 2 space weeks, just type it, which wasn't that hard to actually translate that, but like an engineer's thought process is number input, drop down box of weeks, days, months, but it's actually easy to do that. And I would say that is, in a very micro way, natural language. Now just imagine the whole thing being natural language. But it was totally built that way. I think the problem is most designers, they get myopia, like looking at the world through a straw of their feature. So there's way too many wizards. Way too many of just like, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, task complete. And they're just thinking about their one thing. I remember there was a benefits website for a company like healthcare and stuff like that. And every single thing you did was a wizard. Every single thing. And in fact, I remember hearing the designer in some interview saying, that's the best way to do things. And because it's such a controlled environment. But that's not actually a nice overall experience. You want it to be more open-ended. And I actually think that AIs may end up killing the wizard UI in the long term by you just tell it what you want and the steps will flow from that instead of do this, then do this, then do this. I hate wizards if I can avoid them. Sometimes you can't, but I try to avoid them at all costs. But yeah, I think a lot of designers are imagining that's how you should get there instead of like build a structure where it can happen on your own. It can be done. It's been done.
Well, I think we have been chatting and covering a lot. Thanks again joining us. I'm
Pleasure.
really hoping to have run this again with you. I think there are so many knowledge you could share with other designers and can actually learn from you.
I love being here, and thank you for the great conversation. It's been a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you. Right? Bye.